How you doing, guys? This is Matthias Atva from Direct Dreadnought, your Dreadnought PS4 replay guy. Today I have a Strybog Tier 4 Akula Corvette replay, but instead of posting an elite level replay with funny memes, doing a commentary on gameplay tactics, or something silly and fun, I'd like to shoot from the hip and do something a little unscripted. I'm a huge fan of Dreadnought and love the gameplay, balance, lore, and the hard work of this small independent development team competing with industry heavyweights owned by modern megacorps just trying to suck every red cent out of our pockets with little love or respect for the fans. That being said, I really have a bone to pick about the Akula Corvettes. So instead of singing Greybox and Dreadnought praises in this video, I'm going to rant a little about my grumblings for what I consider the worst ship in the game, having played all 15 ship classes and mastering most of them. Before I get started, I just wanted to say how happy I've been with my little Dreadnought YouTube hobby. As I've stated before, I've been a Gen X gamer all of my life and felt like some of the best aspects of my gamer hobby life were lost to time. So when I started playing Dreadnought, which I consider to be a great game that fills the epic giant spaceship battle niche genre that I've wished for all my life, I totally jumped right in. I figured this time around I'd share my joy with fans and do what little I can to promote this awesome, well-developed, very balanced, and satisfying game, even with some of the flaws that this small, independent, groundbreaking company, Greybox, works very hard to fix. I could have jumped on the bandwagon of many more popular games that I also used to play, but my love is for Dreadnought and the sci-fi space battle genre as a whole. Although I've been playing other popular mainstream games, I've always had a thing for the brilliant gems and underdogs I've come across in my gaming career. I think my favorite games have to include Tom Clancy's End War, PlanetSide, Star Trek Online, and Sins of the Solar Empire. What all these games have in common with Dreadnought is that they were unique and groundbreaking with innovative and fairly balanced mechanics and stayed true to their canon or had an immersive and creative story that didn't get bogged down in campaign modes and delivered a challenge while sucking you into their universe with awesome graphics and game design that didn't overshadow the gameplay experience. All of these awesome underdog games took 1 to 3 years before they got the attention, popularity, and funding that they deserved. End War didn't get any attention until 1.5 years after release, and then it exploded for a while. Star Trek Online was released basically incomplete on PC, barely having 1.5 factions to play with less than 10% of the content it has today. It took 2 years for STO to gain any traction on PC, and nowadays, a decade later, it's one of the more popular games on PS4 for sci-fi space genre. Likewise, Sins of a Solar Empire took a couple years to take off, and although PlanetSide had a slow start, it quickly gained popularity and now has a sequel also on PS4. So any problems and shortcomings Dreadnought has, don't worry. I have a feeling things will get ironed out soon because this is an epic game and the devs actually listen to us and work very hard. Speaking of which, we have a big Corvette class redesign coming up, and it seems that a lot of the new features address Akula Corvette flaws, which we'll get into throughout the video. I really like how the change is being explained and presented. I'm not a big fan of huge buffs or nerfs in any game. They typically make matters worse or introduce new problems and often alienate the fans of the class or weapon being changed. This time it seems the devs are changing the feel of Corvettes without directly nerfing or buffing them. Instead, they are introducing movement mechanics to make Corvettes feel more realistic, making them harder to kill, but also limiting the old mechanic of parking super close to enemy ships where they are helpless to defend themselves, and hopefully ending the rampant noob farming that was happening at lower levels. Hopefully this will also make Corvettes more survivable and competitive in Legendary mode, where I can tell you it's not easy to thrive. On top of all this, many redundant or underpowered modules are being changed or moved around, which I believe was much needed. What's sad about the Akula Corvettes is that they actually look very cool and in theory should have a well-defined purpose or role in this universe. Although we all like the super fast and sleek craft often found in sci-fi sagas, there is a massive fan base for hard-to-kill ugly ducklings that hit very hard. We can relate these ships to the Russian Stormovik or US Thunderbolt of World War II, the modern-day American Warthog, the Halo Pelican, or the dropship from the old Aliens movie, and even the classic and beloved Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. Basically the rugged flying tank, but for space. The Akula Corvettes definitely look the part and have a purpose to fill in their genre, but their game mechanics certainly let them down. And that's what bums me out about Akula Corvettes. I don't think they are the worst Corvettes or even ship in the game because I don't like this flying tank game style. I actually love it, and there are many fans of this space archetype. But it's that the Akula Corvettes don't perform this mechanic very well at all, and of all 15 ship classes I've played up to Tier 4 and 5, of which I have 15 Tier 4 ships and 12 Tier 5, the Akula Corvettes are the absolute hardest to be effective with. I feel I really do have to work much harder to have a decent game with Akula Corvettes than I do with any other ships in Dreadnought. You'll notice that this video has no game music or sound, and that's because the Akula Corvettes often have a super annoying sound bug that ruins games, which brings me to my first issue with this Corvette line, its ridiculous engine noise. When I think of a flying tank in space or an old indestructible rust bucket like the Millennium Falcon, I imagine a mean, powerful engine roaring like a Harley Davidson or a Mack truck. Instead, the devs insist upon giving the Akula Corvettes some sort of weird, quirky, high-pitched noise, often annoying like 1950s flying saucer sounds akin to a comical flying car on some kid's cartoon, which is a far cry from the heavy, armored, serious feel of Akula Vector, which has its company origins on Earth and has a serious Cold War-era industrial theme. What makes matters worse is this gimpy engine noise often causes serious sound bugs in the game and totally ruins immersiveness and the overall gameplay experience. Even when the engine sound bugs don't kick in, I'm not a fan of the sound effect to begin with, and I haven't met anyone who really is. Now let's move on to actual gameplay mechanic flaws that not only make the Akula Corvette the worst Corvette in my opinion, but also the worst ship class. The biggest flaw is by far the Akula Corvette family's abysmal turn rate, which is seemingly worse than most, if not all, destroyers and even the Oberon Dreadnought. It literally takes this thing a quarter of the map to make an unassisted 180-degree turn, and also makes it extremely predictable and easy to hit. This is mitigated somewhat by its large hull pool at, 20,000 at Tier 4, and with the reinforced officer briefing, it pushes it past the hull value of the Oberon Vindicta destroyer. But we all know how fast 20,000 points of hull can go away in Dreadnought, especially when you are easier to hit than a destroyer or even some Dreadnoughts. What further exacerbates this issue is that the Akula Corvettes have a very poor climb and dive. What really gets under my skin about this situation is that in space, or when anti-gravity is involved in sci-fi, the Akula Corvette's shape would really indicate that it should have a very good turn rate, seeing as it's wider than it is long. A great example of this is the Star Fury fighters from Babylon 5 and many other pseudo-realistic space physics sci-fi shows. Something like the Akula Corvettes or even the Jupiter Arms Corvettes should really be able to turn on a dime because of their blocky shapes. But instead, the tactical options for the Akula Corvettes are limited to really only two strategies. One, fly at the target, stop, and be incredibly vulnerable to attack. Or two, do a strafing run, run away, and spend the next minute turning around and lining up for another attack. And this brings me to my second biggest gripe about the Akula Corvette gameplay mechanics, its very crappy guns. Let's get into the more glaring problems with their guns, if you could even call them that, before we get into the more nuanced flaws. So first of all, Akula Corvettes at all tiers only have 2 rounds in the clip and an extremely long reload, just to add insult to injury. This really doesn't even make sense from a lore standpoint, considering how rocket-type projectiles work. But overlooking that for now, if you miss with any of your shots, you are left totally open to counterattack and have to waste large portions of the game reloading. You can circumvent this by essentially using your secondary guns as primaries and occasionally taking pot shots with the main guns, but doesn't that defeat the purpose? Additionally, the choice of secondary guns is very poor until you reach Tier 5 and unlock the bolt guns, which all Corvettes have access to. The laser beams are very close range and almost comical to use, which explains why no one uses them, unless they haven't gained enough experience to buy plasma yet. And plasma guns are also very short ranged and their accuracy is worse than a stormtrooper's. To make matters worse, the other 2 Corvette families have main guns that do more DPS than plasma, more accurately, and at longer ranges. You have to ask yourself, why captain a flying tank if it has such a hard time killing things? On top of all that, the Akula main guns wouldn't be so bad if they were accurate or easy to use, but they are semi-auto, so you can't just hold down the trigger, and they have a weird arcing trajectory. It's very challenging to predict how the shots will land, and are a far cry from the point-and-shoot capabilities of the other Corvette main guns. If you are close, you have to aim low. If you are far, you have to aim high. And if you're in mid-range, you just have to pray. This is very odd considering I can't think of any other spaceship weapon besides the Dreadnought mortar secondaries that even bother with trajectory and gravity issues. And why should they? Many battles take place outside of a gravity well, and we are in a universe of super advanced technology. I think a much better option would be either an artillery type approach where the main guns are a single powerful shot with a low reload, or have a small clip of single shot projectiles like the Corvette bolt guns or the Oberon artillery cruisers without the arcing trajectory, as if the guns needed any more hardship to use. Next we look at its speed. Allegedly, the Akula Corvettes are supposed to be the fastest Corvette moving in a straight line, but it sure doesn't feel that way. It looks slow, it feels slow, and it acts sluggish. Jupiter and even Oberon Corvettes seem to have no problem outrunning me, even without the use of their modules. They also have no problem staying on my tail, that's for sure. I understand that with higher hull, armor, and mass, this Corvette's line should be the slowest, but it's still a Corvette. I shouldn't feel like the Oberon capital ships can run me down, or what's the point of even building this thing? And its awkward but cool looking shape makes the Akula Corvette absolutely comical at trying to negotiate even the simplest obstacle and terrain challenges. Again, why even bother? If it's supposed to be an unstoppable flying tank, it should feel like one, and not be foiled when it encounters a small floating rock or scrapes its paint against a building. It should still be the slowest and least maneuverable Corvette, don't get me wrong, but it should still be able to fly circles around any non-Corvette ship class, right? Now let's move on to modules and how the Akula Corvettes can't really take advantage of them and are forced into using the Immelmann, which my guess is was invented specifically to make the Akula Corvettes suck slightly less. And that's bad because the Immelmann isn't a very good module at all. The Jupiter Arms Corvettes simply don't need it because they are fast and nimble enough to go or do whatever they want on the map. And if you equip thrust amp to an Oberon Corvette, it can do all sorts of crazy stunts in very unpredictable ways, as I'm sure you've seen in my videos. Even without it, the Oberon Corvette can use their 360-degree guns to fight asymmetrically, gaining tactical flexibility, and can still get in and out of tight spots and take advantage of the map. Neither of these Corvettes have any problem turning around, but with Akula Corvettes without Immelmann, turning around is a long and arduous task. Can you think of the last time you saw an Oberon or Jupiter Arms vet use the implement module? But it seems almost like all Akula Corvettes do. This is because they basically have to, which restricts their access to other internal modules. Using Cloak on the Akula Corvette seems novel until you take double damage and your hull value gets totally negated. So in your primary slot you are kind of forced into using Armor Amp because even the most novice players can hit you, or Weapon Amp, which turns you into a kamikaze, and that's no fun for anyone. Lucky for us, some good module changes are on the way and Implement is being thrown in the trash. Instead we'll get Turn Amplifier like what's found in artillery cruisers, which will be much more effective and less predictable and slow, and can be used on all Corvettes in theory. Additionally, Cloak is being made an internal module, so Akula Corvettes can cloak and use their Armor Amp or Weapon Amp or even Thrust Amp, which will certainly help its game. Overall, even with some of the more positive changes coming to Corvettes, the Akula Corvettes seem like they got the short end of the stick. The flying tank strike craft is a class and trope ever present in the vast majority of space sci-fi and war movies, games, comics, books, and shows, so the Akula Corvette's role and gameplay style should be unique, simple, and well designed. Instead, it seemed like the devs perfectly fleshed out the Jupiter and Oberon Corvettes and made the Akula Vets the strike ship that just is not like the other two, even to a fault. The Jupiter Arms Corvette is so simple and easy to use, very fast, powerful, and effective, the ultimate glass cannon you can start the Corvette experience with that anyone can pick up. The Oberon Corvette is sleek, versatile, tactically flexible, and still very survivable, while the Akula Corvettes, even though they look good, have a little more hull and are supposed to represent an entire spaceship genre, don't really do anything well except get shot at. A lot. In theory, being the tank of a class can be fun, but who wants to play a slow-flying punching bag with the most ineffectual and rage-inducing main guns in Dreadnought? On top of all that, it's the only ship that really got a nerf in the last patch. Even with the new changes coming, it just seems like the Akula Corvette is very hard to use and requires a large gameplay effort without the big payout. It isn't the concept of the craft that's wrong, and it certainly has a role to fill in this game, but I really do believe this ship family needs a small overhaul or at least a few well-needed tweaks to make it more effective in its intended role. The Akula Corvettes will never be my favorite ship or even my favorite Corvette, but I know players who consider these ships the main reason why they play the game. They love the look and like playing flying tanks, and I just think those players deserve a little better. Well, that about wraps up my rant about the Akula Corvettes. I usually sing endless praises about Dreadnought and the devs, so this time I wanted to keep it real and voice some gripes about a ship line that I found unnecessarily hard to use, doesn't perform or function well in its intended role, and deserves a little more attention and love from the devs. That's the way I see it anyway, just saying. Thanks for listening, and if you agree or disagree about my opinions on the Akula Corvette line being poorly designed flying dumpster fires, please let me know in the comments. I'm curious to see if other players feel the same way, or if I totally missed the mark on how to use these cool looking ships. Well, that's it from me for now, and I'll see you soon in Sinley Bay.